Good afternoon. My name is Cindy Mazer, and I'm the Director for ADR, Alternative Dispute Resolution at FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And I'm also the Chair of the Workplace Conflict Management section of the Interagency ADR Working Group. So on behalf of those two organizations, I want to welcome you here this afternoon. Some of you have come through the rain, and I do appreciate that. So let's start with some thank yous. We have a lot of people who helped to make this happen. We have the ADR office, which is Pam Pontillo, and her boss, which is Janet Frymuth. And we have Victor Voloshin from EEOC. And we have the Ombuds office, which is Kathy Barkey and Rita Franklin. And so from FEMA, we have Elizabeth Bissell and many, many people who help from FEMA, normally Charmaine Oliphant. And then one other person I want to thank is the person you met coming in. That was Martha Gallagher and Coletha Clements. And we have a lot of people who help us. Anwar Mallory, Lee Blankard, Richard Cronin, and Robert Cooper, and Mohammed and Wayne. All these people go ahead and make this event possible for us. They all basically volunteer their time, so we really appreciate, especially Department of Energy, who makes their staff available, this room available, and all of their equipment in terms of recording, video, and voice. So I want to thank everybody who makes it possible. Before we start today, I'd just like to turn your attention to what we're going to be doing next time. So this is going to be it for 2014. For 2015, January the 29th, which is a Thursday, from noon to 1:30 here, we're going to present on unconscious bias and the mediation ADR process. So unconscious bias is a big hot topic right now that everyone's talking about. Probably began a few years ago as something that people started to notice. And our speakers are going to be Charles Pettit and Lester Hoffman. So we're looking forward to that. Please join us in 2015 for our first session for the new year. For today, though, we're talking about the boss whisperer. We're talking about bullying. And our speaker is Lynn Frazier, and she's the director for ADR at the Federal Election Commission. And she oversees the office there that is involved with enforcement of violations of the Federal Election Campaign Act. She also is a volunteer for the Center for Dispute Settlements Mediation Program for the Office of Police Complaints for Washington, D.C., and she has professorial duties for students as far away as Vienna, Austria, and Hong Kong, and also nearby at Georgetown University Law Center. So she's going to talk to us about bullying. Bullying is a term that I think generally we think about a big kid on the playground, but for the ADR community and for many others, it's really starting to take on a much broader meaning for us. So we're looking at issues around appropriate intervention. We're looking at issues around power and vulnerability. We're looking at all kinds of issues that ADR professionals are very concerned with. So with that, I'll turn things over to Lynn Frazier, and we're very, very lucky to have her with us today.
Good morning. As Pam said, as Cindy said, we're going to be talking about dealing with the problem of the abrasive leaders. Maybe a better definition is a discussion on how to reduce workplace suffering. Okay. First problem. I don't want to stand in front of the slides.
Just tell me to slide and I'll move it.
Okay. But won't I be in the way of the slides? All right, the next slide. The Boss Whisperer Institute was founded by Dr. Laura Crawshaw, and I took the training in August, and I was amazing for most of this type of training. I was the only lawyer in the group. All the rest were executive coaches, and most of them were psychologists, with the exception of one medical doctor who works at coaching aggressive doctors. Aggressive leaders rub their coworkers the wrong way, but they do much more than that. They direct interpersonal aggression towards coworkers. We're not talking about unpopular decisions. We're talking about actual aggressive behavior. And it's not just towards their subordinates. It's also towards peers or even superiors. There's a pattern to their behavior, and it's usually directed at more than one person. Next. Does this sound familiar? He's always talking down to people, interrogating them. Why didn't you do this? Why don't you do that? He makes people feel like idiots. We're all afraid of him. He walks around, sees something that sets him off, and starts yelling. It gets so tense to the point where no one wants to even talk. It's getting harder and harder to come to work. The best days at work are days when she isn't here. That's when we can breathe. His behavior shouldn't be tolerated. We shouldn't have to continually walk on eggshells. I used to enjoy coming to work, but since she's been here, all I can think about is finding a way to get out. Next. What the aggressive leader often does, they overreact. He makes snap judgments, makes assumptions, and leaps to conclusions without investigating. When you try to tell her about a problem, she doesn't listen. She just jumps the gun and blames us. He's easily angered, and it can be directed at anyone. He forgets it an hour later, but the target remembers it. It's inflicted deep personal wounds. They over-control. It's all command and control. It's always just do it. There's no discussion or input. She's a total micromanager. She treats us like kids instead of adults. I've got a babysitter for a boss. You'd better do things exactly the way he wants or he'll eat you for lunch. He has power and he never lets you forget who is king. His department is his domain. They use threats. He's the my way or the highway. When he gets worked up, he threatens to sack the whole team. She told someone that if they didn't like the way she ran things, she'd be glad to write him a referral. He enforces through fear. It's shape up or ship out. They also use public humiliation. He yells at people and belittles them out where everyone can hear. He will tell you what he thinks you're doing wrong right in the hallway where everyone can hear. She criticizes the entire team for the mistake of a few, and it's not hard to figure out who she means. He can be really intimidating. Everyone is afraid of getting hammered in front of the group, so they climb up and say nothing. It seems the abrasive leader never learned the adage about praising in public and criticizing in private. They also use condescension. He always talks down to people like she's the only one that knows anything. He's famous for rolling his eyes and snorting in contempt. He batters people with questions. He quizzes them like they're absolute clods. He prides himself on demonstrating his brilliance. He enjoys putting you in your place like a cat toying with a mouse. These are themes kind of the aggressive leader, and we'll talk about that in a little bit about how the use of themes it goes with the coaching. All of the quotes that I just read are just some of which coworkers actually gave to the coaches. You know, these are not made up for examples. These are the real deal. Other traits that are commonly seen in the abrasive leader: belligerent language, hostile humor, or blatant favoritism. Do what I want, and you get good things. Don't do what I want, bad things happen. The key factor to all this is disrespect. I've never been treated this way in my life, with such disrespect. When you come to work, you leave your self-respect at the door and hope to pick it up on the way out. I would never expect to be treated this way as a customer of a business. Next. The Center for Creative Leadership survey shows that 74% of successful executives had at least one intolerable boss. These are just a few of the things that show the impact of abrasive leaders. The Gallup survey, the main reason people quit: high absenteeism, lowered morale and productivity, increased legal actions, retaliation, sabotage, assaults, unfortunately even homicide. Let me do the next Other assumptions or theories that staff may have about an abrasive leader? He's evil. She's just plain crazy. They are just jerks. Next. Research has shown, however, that aggressive leaders really have little or no awareness of the impact of their aggressive behavior. They're pretty clueless. They feel no ill intent. They want to get the job done. They see intimidation as the way to get the job done. Abusive behavior is learned. Aggressive behavior is coachable in a majority of the cases. Next. An adequate leader, when they see a problem, they explore the cause and then ask, is the employee unable to do what needs to be done, or are they unwilling? They address the problem. If they're unable, they get them the resources and or training that's needed. If they're unwilling, then they set limits and consequences. Next. The abrasive leader, however, when they see a problem, they immediately go to a diagnosis of incompetence. They're stupid. They're lazy. They attack what they see as incompetence. They dominate through intimidating, and they use threat displays and bullying behavior. Next. In the wild, bears and bosses in the workplace just want to get their job done. They just want to go around about their business. They see their business as survival. It's no different in the workplace than a grizzly out in the wild. They believe dominance pays off, and they defend against threats to their survival. You'll pay if you get in their way. Why do people behave this way? Next. When there's a perceived threat, anxiety goes up, and then you defend against that. Seems pretty simple. Next. In the response to a perceived threat and increased anxiety, you can flee or you can fight. I mean, that's the normal two reactions of people in response to a threat. Some of the greatest threats is a sense of annihilation, which could be defamation, termination, demotion, promotion, terminal illness, or a sense of abandonment, divorce, loss of social status, even a rise in social status, as odd as that may seem. Next. The same dynamics are normally in play in the workplace. In response to a perceived threat, you can fight or you can take flight. Next. But in reality, there's a third option in the workplace to replace the either fight or flight. And knowing you have an additional option will reduce the perception of the threat, which then reduces the anxiety, and thirdly, allows the ability to work through the issues. Next. The dynamics of working through the issues basically is that in psychological threats representing annihilation or abandonment, whether it's internal or external, are signaled by anxiety, producing defensive responses. An insecure executive responds to perceived threats, usually in a continuing pattern of extreme defensiveness, aggressive behavior, unless they learn another way to reduce their anxiety. Next. The abrasive leader's view is they perceive a threat, their anxiety goes off the charts, and they respond with aggressive behavior. Sound like psychobabble? It did to me at first. Neuroscience research has shown that a perceived threat to one's status, that's losing a job, getting demoted, activates the same parts of the brain as a threat to one's life. So it's not just that this is something silly, it's just a job. Why we don't call them bullies? The word bully implies an intent to harm. They don't wake up in the morning gleefully concocting ways to torment their coworkers. They are highly anxious about being perceived able to do their job. They believe they only use the stick because they've never experienced a carrot approach in order to demonstrate competence. They don't see the harm they do others and ultimately themselves. Next. They just don't get it. They don't read others' emotions, and they are empathetically deficient. Empathy is really a relatively new term. Alfred Adler described it as, it is to see with the eyes of another, to hear with the ears of another, and to feel with the heart of another. Sympathy, on the other hand, is closely correlated, and it may stem from empathy, but it's a vicarious emotional reaction to someone else's emotional state. It can be compassion, concern, sorrow, but it's not the same as empathy. Next. How does management respond to these abrasive leaders? In a word, well, 2 words. They flee. Why would senior management perceive a referral for an aggressive behavior as a threat to themselves? What anxieties would referring an aggressive manager for coaching induce? Employees might think that people in glass houses shouldn't throw rocks. Will the individual quit and take the business with them? Will the individual sue? Next. So where do they flee when anxiety hits? We'll talk about what specifically HR's role is in dealing with the abrasive manager in a bit. But, next. The employer's flight mechanism and defense is, well, he's got a very strong personality. Well, no one can expect perfect management style all the time. Some of our employees are really challenging. We don't want to make too much of this. She gets the job done. Maybe he'll get a job somewhere else. Next. Employers don't intervene due to their own anxiety and fear. They're afraid, just like anyone else. Next. The organization's anxiety can lead them to denial. He's just got some difficult employees. Displacement. Is there someplace we can isolate him? You know, a little corner somewhere. Delay. Maybe she'll just get a job somewhere else. Employers' inaction often make employees think they're evil too, or they condone what the abrasive manager is doing. In reality, they are fearful. The fear of being harmed or doing harm, the failure of past intervention events. Maybe they've tried to work with other abrasive leaders and it didn't go well. They tend to focus on evidence versus negative perceptions. They believe that people cannot change, and the belief that the sole option to end workplace bullying behavior is termination. And we're here to tell you that you can give them hope and empowerment with the ability to intervene. Very often, the coach actually helps the senior management with the intervention process. But they must intervene. I want to go to the next slide. I think we're one behind. There we go. Help them see the impact of the aggressive behavior on the organization, and help them understand that the employer must care enough to require a change in behavior. Next. Intervention, step 1. It must be clear that interpersonal conduct is as important as technical competence. Has aggressive behavior led to a chronic pattern of negative perceptions? That's really what we're talking about, is the perception by the people in the workplace. Negative perception is evidence of unacceptable conduct. An example, we've had a steady stream of complaints from coworkers about their experiences interacting with you. We don't see this with other managers, faculty, administrators. This is not acceptable and cannot continue. We need to have you turn this around. Next. Don't get pulled into fact battles. Well, you weren't there. You don't understand how what they said to me that led me to say, don't do that. Don't even go there. Instead, respond with, the fact is, we don't know. We weren't there. We don't know exactly what happened, but we do know one thing for a fact, and that is your coworkers feel that they're being treated disrespectfully, and this cannot continue. Next. Intervention step 2. The employer needs to make the individual care enough to change. It's not an easy process, but the majority of aggressive leaders can be coached to change their behavior. The employer must set clear limits and set clear consequences. Next. because it's a painful process. And if there's no consequences, they may drop out partway through. Offer help, internal mentoring, and external coaching, such as the Boss Whisperer. But it's an aspect of executive coaching, so it doesn't have to be this particular program. Next. HR's role is detect negative perceptions, help the employer explore options, help management see that they can and should hold leaders accountable for acceptable conduct, make management care enough to set limits and consequences, help them predict what future consequences of failing to intervene, offer hope and help. Next slide. Coaching the abrasive leader is basically a self-reflective inquiry undertaken by participants about their social interaction. So it's the client and the coach. Next. The coach takes action with the client, looking at what are the negative perceptions, what's causing them, what strategies can we, making sure that the client understands that they're not in this alone, that we can develop to eliminate these negative perceptions permanently. Next. Abrasive leaders lack psychological insight. They're poor empathizers. I don't get it. When I ask my team for input, no one speaks up. Why do you think that is? They're lazy? They're stupid? Next. Coaching. The coach needs to develop trust with the client. Once we determine the exact nature of these damaging perceptions and determine what generates them, we can then work to develop strategies to eliminate these negative perceptions. This is a confidential process. I do not share our findings or work with anyone. That's really, really critical. And as you get into the process and see how the negative, pages and pages of perceptions, some good, but mostly negative, it's really hard. And it's really hard for the client. They're thinking, I had no idea people felt this way about me. Coaching step 2. Next. Coworkers are individually interviewed by the coach. I've had some people in my agency ask if they could do it, willingly on their own part with me because they believe they've been perceived as a negative or aggressive leader. It's a pretty painful process. And so, yeah, you could, but first they have to give you authorization to interview all of their coworkers, some of their laterals, and some of their superiors. Data is, then when you share that with the client, you purge it of any identifying information and aggregate it into themes. That's what I was talking about with the over controls, don't listen. You kind of put it into themes because it makes it more manageable. The confidential feedback is then reviewed by the coach and the client together. And the client learns exactly what he or she does or says that generates interpersonal distress, the negative perceptions. The coach and the client together determine which theme to address first. Next. An example that we talked about earlier, publicly humiliates. Some examples given, he will dress people down with other employees present. In one meeting, he told a person that they were absolutely worthless. If someone makes a mistake, he'll bring it up in meetings. He'll say, how did you ever come up with a stupid idea like that? People are terrified to say anything, so they don't say anything. They just clam up. Next slide. Coaching. Through coaching, the client learns to read and accurately interpret coworker behavior. They begin developing an empathetic accuracy using the TAD dynamic. This was something that Dr. Croshaw developed. TAD is threat, anxiety, defense. That's her TAD dynamics. Next. The client will gain psychological insight, remembering when the abrasive leader said, I don't get it. When I ask my team for input, no one speaks up. And why do you think that is? I already told you they're lazy, they're stupid. But then they can have, through coaching, an aha moment. They're afraid. Now I get it. They're afraid I'm going to criticize them. Next. Ask the client what strategies could reduce the perception of threat. The client can respond. Some of the responses were, if I have a problem with someone, I could address it behind closed doors. I don't call people names. And if I think someone has a stupid idea, I need to bring them around without making them feel stupid. Clients shift from attacking staff to educating. Next. This is what we call the insight circle. Observe behavior, analyze the behavior, develop a theory on the nature of anxiety, develop a strategy to reduce the anxiety, test the strategy, and then observe the behavior again. Next. Boss whispering, or executive coaching for aggressive leaders, requires an employer commitment. There has to be consequences for most of the situations that involve a truly aggressive manager. It usually is 8 to 10 sessions. They can, Dr. Croshaw says she usually sees demonstrable change by the 3rd session. And in her experience, which is more than 20 years now, 82% achieve acceptable levels of conduct by the end of the coaching. They're not bad people. They have bad management style. They have most of it probably learned from, who knows, probably from childhood. Next. The advantages of intervention. Everybody wins. Employee suffering ends. Employees are heartened that formerly abrasive leader cared enough to work to change. Employees regard employer positively for intervening. Formerly abrasive leader is grateful for employer's willingness to invest in him or her and offer the second chance through coaching. Employer reduces potential for litigation, attrition, anti-management sentiment, and employer retains the leader's technical expertise. So it truly is a win-win for everyone. But what if the abrasive leader cannot or will not change and is terminated? Next. Employee suffering ends. Employees regard employer positively for intervening. Employer reduces potential for litigation because they can demonstrate that they intervened and tried to make a change. And the employer has peace of mind knowing they did everything in their power to remedy the situation before termination. Next. Preventing workplace bullying behavior. Bullying behavior, as we probably all know, is contagious. It really can be, because staff can take their cue from a bully and from someone that behaves in a bullying manner. So organizations need to establish a code of respectful conduct and clearly voice a prohibition on psychological harassment. That's the newest term, and actually more accurate for bullying behavior is psychological harassment. The employers need to provide for physical and psychological safety in the workplace. They need to live the code, all of them, from the top down and from the bottom up. And they need to enforce the code. Next. This was a quote by George Washington, who actually had the reputation of being rather abrasive. I know he's the first president of our country, but he had a reputation. Every action done in company ought to be done with some sign of respect for those who are present. Next. You can get more information off the Boss Whispering website. There's a section called Publication and Research that's open to the public. You can go in and get quite a bit of information there. It's at www.bosswhispering.com. Next slide. Remember, leadership is not a title. It's behavior. So please live it. Last slide. Dr. Croshaw started using this because she constantly heard clients so distressed as they went through, especially through the review of the feedback, that she actually had some that she was seriously concerned about suicide. I mean, they get that distressed when they understand how they are perceived. And so she kind of found herself repeating, like a mantra, just stay calm, we'll work through this. Just stay calm, we'll work through this. And so that when this started popping up everywhere, the keep calm and carry on, she used it. So that's what we all had, buttons that say keep calm and carry on. And we have them up all over our agency now to remind staff, no matter what's going on, just keep calm and keep going, and it will be worked through. Thank you very much.
So we'll take some questions. I have the first one. Have you ever used this coaching model?
I've done it in a very brief format. That was from someone within the agency that wanted to know, but we haven't done it to the extent where we've gone and done the interviews. When you talk about that, the client kind of goes, they're not quite so sure. And so that's why you really need employer, or the top of the organization really needs to intervene and give buy-in, because otherwise it's a pretty painful process. And so it's challenging, to say the least, to get someone to focus that much energy on change, that significant of change, without a certain amount of incentive. Any other questions?
So I have another one. Are there special techniques on how to give feedback to someone who is rather intimidating?
Yeah, she talks about that, and you'll see that in her books and in her publications. There's actually quite a bit. And in the Boss Whisperer training, that's a lot of what you do, is learn how to give feedback. We actually did a lot of role play in how to give feedback to someone so they can hear it, so their own anxiety doesn't stop their hearing. And that's a key part of the process, is to get their trust and for them to know absolutely that it's confidential. Yes?
So hold on, we need the mic.
Depending on how, it said 8 to 10 sessions, and depending on how frequently you can meet with a manager, say, or supervisor, it could take a year of coaching, couldn't it?
It could. Dr. Croshaw said sometimes there's a bit of a gap, but you have the first session and where they agree or disagree to enter the coaching process. The next one is the feedback on the information, and very often it'll be 2-3 weeks, a month before because they really need time to digest that. Repeatedly, she said people were pretty devastated when they realized how they were perceived by others in the workplace. You would think that they would know. How can they not know when they yell and scream at people and call them names? But many times they're not.
So by the third session, is that where they kind of succumb to saying, I'm willing to work with this then?
Yeah,
That's kind of
yeah.
the
When
change?
they really start to say, okay, I can do this.
Okay.
But the coach, and that's one of the things the coach has to help them see, that there's a way of dealing with it in chunks, kind of. And that's why when you get all this feedback, all these quotes from people, and you put them into themes, it really helps the client deal with it, instead of just this. And she always includes in the feedback some of the positive things, because she also asks about positive things. They're really smart, they really know their job, they're a very hard worker, so she always includes some of the good things, because she doesn't want the client to just throw up their hands and think it's the end of the world. And so she does give the good stuff, but it's usually that third time that they take a deep breath and they say, okay, I can do this. Yes.
It seems to me, thank you. It seems to me that what's required is for the person to have a different sense, perhaps a radically different sense, of what it means to be a leader. Could you address that?
Yeah, it is. That's why I included that next to last slide. It's not a title. They can give you the title, but the title is really just that, a title. Truly being a leader is behavior. It's how you treat people and how you behave with your staff. Krista and I, this is my assistant director, Krista, we were just talking about, my husband loves to watch Judge Judy, which I find appalling. And she's pretty rude and obnoxious to people. People in power don't need to do that. I mean, if they understand, they don't need to do that. They have the power. And it's kind of the same thing with a good leader. Leads by example, leads by encouraging their staff, leads by giving credit to their staff, things like that. The aggressive leader, or abrasive leader, whatever title you want to give them, that is a title, they don't get that. They think that nobody will believe that they can do their job unless they just crack that whip. And you know, organizations across the decades that I've been in the workplace, they've always pretty much encouraged and approved aggressive leadership. The real aggressive leader, we're just going to get the job done, whatever it takes. Crack that whip. That was not only approved, it was encouraged. And so this is a change, because if you look at statistics, legal statistics from the lawsuits that have been filed over the decades, gradually we've come to realize that that's not effective leadership. It's costly to the organization in a myriad of ways. And so that's why they have gradually started coming around. But like is pointed out in the slides, the senior leadership, the board of directors, the medical directors, whoever they are, they're also fearful. You know, what if the person I used to work in the securities industry long ago. You know, the real high performer, what if they go out and they take all their clients with them? And that's some of the fear that an organization might have, that this person they very often are a high performer. So they're going to take business with them if they leave, or they might sue. Or maybe the senior leaders, some of them have been abrasive leaders themselves in the past, and so it's kind of like, you know, I see myself in that, and it's difficult for them to intervene.
So I was wondering, kind of on the end of this, you've had the year or so, it's been very successful. Does she mention at all kind of the process with going back to these same employees that are fearful, intimidated? Is there any kind of healing or reconciliation? Or is it just a matter of time that they start to see, oh, the boss is changing and the trust rebuilds? I'm just wondering
Yeah,
about
well,
that.
she actually goes back very often. That's part of the contract and the agreement with the employers, that she can come back in after a period of time and talk to some of the same people that work for this person to talk about the change. And the client knows this is going to happen also. And the client is involved in that also when they talk about it afterwards, and we'll go over the results. So she does follow up. She agrees that that's a necessary component.
What is the shared perspective when you have different cultural backgrounds in the workplace to deal with?
Well, that's can be a really important part, and that usually will come out in the interviews it's much like a 360, interviews, and that usually will come out with when you're interviewing subordinates, laterals, and superiors. You will, in fact, if they feel that there's a cultural disconnect, they'll tell you about it without any difficulty. If that's what you're referring to, or are you asking about whether the coach needs to have, whether there's a necessity for getting a coach that's of the same ethnicity, or I just want to make sure if I'm answering your question.
Yeah, I think both of those.
Okay, yeah, that does come up, but that usually comes up from the client's coworkers or staff when she's interviewing them, or when the coach is interviewing them. That will come out if they believe that, even if they believe rightly or wrongly, because of the way the manager speaks or talks to people, or uses slang expressions that are offensive, that will come out very quickly. in the interviews, and that's part of what they go over then when you're doing the coaching with the client. And as far as wanting a coach that's of the same ethnicity, the same gender, I mean, we've had that even in our conflict coaching program. They've sometimes wanted a coach that was of the same ethnicity or the same gender, and so we've dealt with that even in our small agency. But after the employer agrees to intervene and to provide the coaching, the client meets with the coach and goes over the whole process and talks about what the process entails and what have you. At that time, if there's any hesitation, usually the clients will say so. And you just bring in another coach, because in fact, several of us asked Dr. Croshaw are there instances where you go into the coaching process and you discover, I really don't like this person. I don't like them. There's a personality conflict between them and the coach. That's when you call in another coach. It's just that simple. It may be, I mean, occasionally, she said there have been cases where you have someone that has a true personality disorder or something else. That you deal with as you go. But if it's a personality conflict, because she said for all that they're aggressive, abrasive, obnoxious people at times, she likes them. And that's why she came up with the name Boss Whisperer. You know, we've all heard about the dog whisperer and the horse whisperer. You don't dislike the dog, you don't dislike the horse, you like them. You want them to be better. And that's the same thing that's why she came up with the term Boss Whisperer. It's not because she dislikes them, just the opposite. She said almost exclusively. In the 20-some years she's been doing this, she says she almost never has run into a case where it's someone that she really doesn't like. But she said if that were to happen, it's the coach's responsibility to immediately hand it off to another coach.
So Lynn, if we don't have a coaching program like this in our agencies, do you have any advice for us as colleagues or subordinates?
Well, I think I've often thought that it would be nice to have conflict coaching as well, maybe aspects of that within the Sharing Neutrals program. If we could develop, even if starting out, it would probably be a small cadre of people, but have some people that could, in fact, offer the process to other agencies. Because, like I said, I've had people in my own agency talk to me about, but when you know them and they know you and you're going to be hearing all this bad stuff about them, they're not real sure they want somebody that they see every day, dealing with that. And so that can be difficult, but like with Sharing Neutrals, having someone else come in from another agency could be a way of. I've had some questions about that from people in my staff about conflict coaching. We have 5 conflict coaches for a small agency, but they're all women. And I've had at least one client that said, any chance of getting a guy? And so I told him at this point we don't have any male coaches, but we do have conflict coaches. But we do have some that have expressed an interest in the next time we have training. So this is also a possibility that we could get some executive coaches.
My question is related to hers, and that is, what advice would you give to a subordinate about how they personally could deal with an abrasive or aggressive boss?
Well, Dr. Croshaw actually has a whole chapter in her book called Risky Business. I'd be glad you can get that even if you don't buy the book, you can get that chapter separately in her, or I can send it to you. But she talks about a couple things. One, you need to bring it up with your HR department. People need to be willing to go in and say, listen, I really don't like being talked to that way. The way they treated us in the meeting, blah, blah, blah. They need to build up, because that's where you get the information that will convince the powers that be that something needs to be done, because it hurts the whole organization. And then the other thing is she walks through about how to be assertive without being passive or aggressive. And it may be, she gives a couple examples, different ways of doing it, but it may not be right then in the meeting. It may be immediately thereafter. It may be after you go and talk to someone else and get some other backup, so you don't feel like you're out on that limb all by yourself. Depending on what the situation is, there is ways of dealing with it, just like there is with bullying behavior. But that one chapter specifically, because I did ask her about does she have stuff for the targets of the behavior and how they can effectively deal with it. And so it's on that www.bosswhispering.com. It's on there. It's I want to say chapter 11. And for whatever reason, she titled it Risky Business. And it's maybe risky because you're confronting an abrasive personality. If you have any trouble finding it, let me know. My email's there, and you can. I'll be glad to send it to you. I have it in a PDF. Anything else?
Anything online, Victor?
Thank you very much. Let's all work towards reducing workplace suffering.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it.